Hello, welcome back to Emerge, the health podcast for busy, high performing women. I'm your host, Dr. Alex Swenson Ridley. I'm really excited to be joined today by Sharon Natoli, who is joining us very early in the morning for her. It's 5 a.m. where she is, but she is the author of Find Your Voice, Speak Up and Be Heard by Mastering Your Self Talk, which is a book she's working on this year. She's also the founder of the Self Talk Mastery Program, and she has an inspiring, engaging, and thought-provoking style and talks about what gets in the way of speaking up. And this is so important for us as women, but she challenges audiences to go deeper, to reveal the levers that will shift them from being a spectator in life to directly influencing the results by finding their voice and speaking to be heard. She believes when individuals are freer to express themselves, their influence grows, personal power builds, and they can get on with making the difference they were born to make. So Sharon, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited for this conversation. I shared with you, I'm a little bit obsessed recently with this idea of self-expression and using our voice and being heard because it impacts so much in our health, but also in our life. So I'd love to just start by, hearing a little bit of your own journey. And I'm guessing there's some level of personal experience and journey that's led you to doing the work you're doing today.
Yes, there is. So I have gone through a little bit of a change of direction with my work and my career over the last probably 3 years in particular, but would have started probably 7 years ago. We tend to do well. This is my story is having a career that I enjoyed and doing what I wanted to do, but then getting to a point of realizing that it wasn't really, I guess, my work in terms of my purpose type work. And so I evolved from what I was doing before to transition through some other, I guess, trialing different directions and coming to finding that really the thing that was holding me back was my own self-expression in terms of speaking up and asking for what I wanted, and knowing what I wanted to start with, and then the speaking up and asking for that. And so my background is that I was brought up with a lot of rules and being told what to do and feeling not realizing, but not having that real self connection that helps us to really get to know ourselves, to trust ourselves, and to be able to be in charge of your own self and speak up to ask and direct, to take control of the direction of your life. And so I bring my personal, I guess, stories and experience to what I do now.
That's awesome. And it's I was just in your share thinking about my own journey because recently I've been doing a lot of like energetic work, and so figuring out that my self-expression was really stuck and somewhat similar to you. I think we all have different levels of where like our expressing of who we really are gets limited and stuck. And so in my world, like it was not safe, and just I love my mom to death, but like she was not emotionally available, so my emotions didn't matter. So I learned to just bottle them. And I don't know if you had this experience, but I hit this point, it was only like 2 weeks ago from when we're recording this, where I was like, I have absolutely no idea who I am because I've never actually, used my voice and expressed myself in that way. So I'm curious, like, what did you find? What holds us back, I guess, would be the first question. You had a question on here, like what stops us from speaking up? Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yes. Look, I think when it comes to speaking up, really the first conversation you need to have is with yourself, because we are often, I call it training. We're often trained not to, and we're as humans, going back to the beginning, really, there's our biology. As humans, we want to fit in, we need to fit in, as part of our survival. And so we may hold back from speaking up because we want to be accepted by others. We've got to belong. If we don't belong to a group, and we're on the outside, we're like the animal on the edge of the herd. We're sort of more susceptible to being picked off and not surviving. We know that babies who aren't hugged and held and have that physical touch and don't belong, actually, don't survive. Like there's experiments from many years ago. Of course, you wouldn't do experiments like that these days, but orphans and babies that weren't touched and hugged. And so belonging is part of our very survival. So we have a biological drive to fit in. And of course, if we're speaking up and it's something that doesn't fit with the group, then it becomes, we get help. We can get held back from that. And then, of course, like in our culture, we're trained or brought up to fit in with our family or fit in with our culture. And of course, in our culture in Australia, many Western cultures, it's a culture of there's rules that you need to abide by, procedures, and I guess family structures and expectations. And my mum was a teacher, and my grandfather was a headmaster, and so the awareness of bringing up children was like a schoolroom kind of thing, like do this, do that, be ladylike, use your manners, be polite, don't say anything if you can't say anything nice. Those sort of old Victorian type values was what my upbringing was. And so you add that in, and we become, well, certainly for me, it was very sensitive to, am I doing the right thing? Am I pleasing this person? Am I going to upset them? I don't want to rock the boat. And so we get held back from wanting to fit in, wanting to be accepted, wanting to be, for me, it was like wanting to be the good girl and do the right thing and gain attention that way, which is giving your power away to others to prove yourself or to be accepted, to find the kind of I guess that ultimately being loved because you're being good, as opposed to simply being who you are and being authentically self-expressed. And if that happens over a long time, which for me was I'm 56, and so it's decades of living unaware that was the case, and then gaining an awareness of that is the first thing. So connecting back to yourself is a key starting point, and looking at what's the conversation I'm having with myself in my head, whose stories are they, is that really what I believe, and starting to kind of question some of those things is a really useful starting point to gain awareness of what you're saying to yourself that might be holding you back.
Yeah, I really like that, and just that exploration, because I've talked quite a bit on the show, because I've recently done a lot of kind of studying and learning about neuroscience and our subconscious, and how we've got these
Mm,
programs that run. And I think you shed light on a lot of like where they come from, but they can even come from generations, because like your grandfather
mm.
passed things down onto your mom, and probably your great grandparents like taught your grandfather something. So, and then really like having the courage to look at those and just say, you know, do I believe this? Does this serve me?
Mm,
Like, is this who I am?
mm.
Is huge.
Yes.
And starting that. So that's really cool. And I was going to ask, what you found with, because what I found with the women I work with, and a lot of who I work with is in your age range of like this period of transition where maybe life slowed down enough because your kids aren't little anymore, or you've
Mhm,
been in your job long enough and all that, where you can actually stop and look and have some of this time for reflection. But
mm.
what are some of the tools or things that you found helpful to do that, to like make the space to actually look inside at who you really are?
Yeah, the first step for me was just shaking things up a bit, as in identifying that you're not, that you can separate yourself from your thoughts. So, or gaining awareness that you cannot separate yourself from your thoughts, because if you don't have that awareness, then your thoughts are driving your everyday, how you feel and what you're doing and your behavior, and it's very subconscious. So you just continue on autopilot in the same sort of in the same way. And so for me, what I found really useful right in the beginning, and I was just trying to work out, why do I feel so stuck, that, and I know you've talked about that recently too, like that feeling of, oh, I want to change and things aren't right. I'm not, there's got to be more than this, but what is it? These
Yeah.
questions. And it's like, getting that real sense of frustration with myself as a driver to go, oh, I've got to change something. And so I started to just do little things like, skipping down the street or walking backwards, or, wearing a bright lipstick when I was riding a bike, just silly things that I wouldn't usually do.
Mm-hmm.
I went shopping with no shoes on, which is not ladylike, right? So my rules were like, oh, I couldn't do that. I couldn't go shopping with no shoes on, because sort of like, what would your mother think? She's not
Mm-hmm.
around anymore, bless her. But it's like, oh, that's, a lady wouldn't go shopping with no shoes on. Anyway, it's a funny example, but it was a real insight for me, because when I did that, and it sort of, this idea of challenging yourself comes from the philosophy of Stoicism, where the Stoics, were a group of philosophers from 2,000 years ago that got together, and they wanted to work out, well, how do we master life? How do we remain calm and in control the whole time? And they didn't do that by going and sitting under a tree and meditating in the quiet. It was more, how do you maintain a calm mind in the face of chaos? And so if you put yourself, so the going shopping with no shoes was a bit of a bigger challenge that built on some of the other smaller things of just like, shake yourself up a bit, give yourself, I now call it everyday daring. Like, dare yourself every day to do something that just gets you a little bit out of your comfort zone. And it's, you're in control. It's not like doing something that requires you to call on a whole lot of courage or something. Just little things that, help you to remain in an unstuck way, or remind you. But when you do something like the shopping with no shoes on, for me, and you go into it with a purpose of noticing, how's my self-talk, what's my self-talk doing? So it was an experiment, going into the store and noticing, as soon as I was walking into the store, and that was a security person at the door, because it was a department store, my self-talk started going, oh, they're not going to let you in. They're going to think you're really, a bit of a rebel. What have you got no shoes on? Who would come shopping with no shoes on? I started to notice the self-talk start to amplify. And then I had to but they let me in. They just smiled and let me in. And I had to ask someone in the store for directions. And again, I was like, oh, they're going to tell me, where are your shoes, and blah, 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 and all this. And then there was a man with a boy shopping. I thought, I'm going to be a really bad example, like all of this amplified self-talk. And then I just realized that nobody actually cared, like all of this stuff in my head. And I just got to this point where I'm like, oh, no one cares. Like, no one cares if you go shopping with no shoes on or not. And so therefore you get to choose if that's what you want to do or not. And it was like a purposefully run experiment of putting myself in a manageable challenge. It wasn't a threat to anyone, or it wasn't like I was having to jump out of an aeroplane or something, which is just a big fear thing. It was an everyday type thing that challenges you, notice your self-talk, and then noticing if it matches the actual experience that you're having, which it was completely different, because I'm thinking people are thinking this, and no one cared, no one said anything. And so that getting that separation from knowing that, okay, these are thoughts that are coming into my mind, but they're not actually the truth. They're not actually what's going on around me, because it's all made up. The person's let you into the shop, no one's looking at your feet. It doesn't actually matter. So that inner dialogue just wasn't matched with reality in terms of my experience. So that's where I got a real insight about, okay, I can choose to listen to that or not. And so creating that point, that awareness that you don't have to listen to your thoughts may not be actually matching what's really going on. then you can get into a position, you create that like a space of awareness that you can then start to say, well, actually, maybe that's not true, and then that kind of opened a door for really, journaling a lot more about what was I saying to myself? Was that true? Where did that come from? Is that me? Is that my voice, or is that someone else's voice that I've picked up along the way? And, I've kept that rule, or I've kept that idea, some silly rules that then I identified, and still do. Like, we never get to there's not a finishing point for all of this. but yeah, that was a starting point. So that's one thing. I think if you're wondering, oh, why am I stuck? And maybe it's the way I'm talking to myself, is to do a challenge that puts you into discomfort. Notice what you say to yourself and check it against reality. That was a long answer to that question, but that was
that was really good.
That was a starting point for it. Yes.
Yeah.
And
no, what
yeah.
what I'm thinking about, I'm about to go a little not totally off the rails, but quantum physicsy on you. So my PhD is based in quantum physics, and a lot of what I just finished a course actually we call it, they're calling it creative evolution, but it's kind of like, creationism and Darwinism, which is survival of the fittest, kind of what you described in the beginning of our discussion. Both of them have holes. And so this idea of quantum physics is actually what like marries both things together and kind of makes it all make sense in the world. But one of the things that we do, and what separates us as humans from like all other animals, is we assign meaning to things. And so this is what I was thinking about, like your experience and the rules and all that is just like you have created that not having shoes on going into the store means something, right? Like there's meaning associated with that. And so you challenged that meaning, which is almost like at any given point, like we can decide to assign a different meaning to something, and we all have that capability and possibility. So that's like really cool. So I just thought I'd like marry that into the world of science a little bit, because it's really fun.
Yes, no, that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
And so, and you touched on this a little bit, but I know, like, especially for women and the women who listen to this show, we tend to be people pleasers, right? Like we're so worried about what everyone else will think, or, we have to take care of everybody else. I talk a lot about selfless syndrome, where we put ourselves last and put everyone else, to the detriment of our own health. So how do we start to shift out of that need to please, or like the stories that we make up? Like I use the example, I had a client that, I do a lot with nutritional stuff. So she was at the peak of that, and it was over the holidays. So people kept bringing her like cookies and stuff, and she kept taking them and not wanting them. And then her husband answered the door one day and was like, "Oh, thanks for bringing that and thinking of us, but we're not eating that right now. Is there someone else you want to give it to?" And it was just like, not a big deal. And so I think there's this thing. So how do we start to shift out of that need to please and ultimately stifling ourselves because of that?
Yes. Yeah. So that's part of our training is to please others, and to of course do things that others want, or to have this belief that by pleasing others, that's how we are accepted and how we gain belonging, when actual fact, it's almost the opposite, that if we can start to really connect with ourself and our authentic self, and understand our values and create personal boundaries, which is a key thing to move away from people pleasing, is to know what are your boundaries, and to consciously think about that, and to note down what they are. What are your values? What are your boundaries? Then that's going to help, because without that, we're like a boat without a sail, bobbing around this way, that way. But I think one of the key underlying beliefs around that, which can really hold us back and make that difficult, is thinking that if we're not pleasing others, then we're not good enough, we're not accepted. It's like a source of shame. To kind of get to the root of it, when actually it's where our power comes from. If you can connect to yourself and understand yeah, what are my boundaries? What will I accept? What's acceptable for me? What makes me happy? What do I need for myself to be on an even keel, or to feel that, to maintain that sense of self-connection and self-trust, and to know myself, to know what you need and ask for it, and seeing that and believing that, seeing that as a source of how you source your power, rather than seeing that as a source of shame. It was I think it's a key change belief to challenge. So to kind of move from, okay, that's not a source of shame, which is how I
Yeah.
felt in terms of, like, my upbringing. If you do this, do that, then you're a good girl. Then okay, I can feel good about that. So if I don't do that, I feel like kind of ashamed, because I'm not being good enough. I'm not being a good girl. I deserve to be punished in some way. Really, that's the thing, to try to challenge that belief, if you have that belief, and to find power in your authentic voice, which is doing that work to really to that self-connection work. And I say, your voice is not found in, like, affirmations or sayings or phrases. It's seated in silence. Your authentic voice is seated in silence. If you can find time to sit with yourself, then, and take yourself back to your heart and listen to your heart and that guidance, your voice will emerge from there.
Yeah, so true. You just brought up, I'm in a all women mastermind as part of a business thing, but we focus on money and kind of get into this realm of meditation and manifestation and some of that stuff. But our the leader challenged us. She's like, just find 5 to 10 minutes this week and, like, literally do nothing, like no phone,
Yeah.
no meditating, no thinking, like just lay on your bed. We're so disconnected, and I think that's where a lot of us struggle and feel like we have no idea who we are really
Mm,
authentically, and we've learned not to trust our intuition and trust our gut, which is a lot of
mm,
what you're talking about. And we're seated in all this, like, shame and guilt and lack of self-worth, which ends up actually
mm,
impacting so many things in the body. um,
mm.
but finding that
Yes.
place to just be quiet, I love that. It's in the silence, is where you are.
Yes,
Huge.
yes, and you bring up a good point too. Which is about, you can use your body to influence your mind. Now, I'm not an expert in that way, but
Mhm.
most of what I've been talking about so far is, you're trying to change your thoughts, challenge your thoughts, and talk to yourself differently. But yes, using your body, like like yoga, or exercise, getting into nature. Your body, you can work from your body up as well as your mind down.
Yes.
both ways. Yes, to create that peaceful awareness, I think, is which helps you to hear your intuition. And again, I had no idea that I used to, I knew intuition was a thing, but to
Mhm.
listen to it or to actually act on it, like, there is, I think there's stages, like, oh, I have an intuition, what is it saying, and then actually acting on it, like, because
Yeah.
that's that's because you can have a gut feeling but ignore it,
Oh, easily. I bought a
of
half million
course.
dollar building with the gut feeling not to. That was a rough learning experience. But, we all have levels.
What was that? So,
I bought a $500,000 building,
oh,
knowing in my gut I shouldn't have been. And I've shared this story quite a bit on the podcast, but
yeah.
there's levels of that. And I think, kind of like you share, there's ways to start tuning into this stuff without making huge drastic shifts in our lives necessarily,
Yes.
or having to do the big thing, but just starting to really connect with who you are and letting that out in
Mm,
some ways for yourself.
mm,
And then I think as you know get more comfortable with that, we can let it out to the world. So that was going to be my next
mm,
question in this step, because obviously the world changed a lot in the last couple of years. And
mm,
we have the capability to speak out and to reach more people. And I've, in the last year and a half gone completely virtual and all that. And so I've been challenged by this of like, because you can hide online too. You can hide under a facade. Like there's a lot of inauthenticity there. So, for those who are in that space or the realm of creating what's next or being challenged by, needing to put yourself out there in a new way, what are your recommendations around moving in that direction? I know that's some of what you talk about.
Yeah. It's good it's useful to start, to start small and to change your habits, and to do even, like a really little small things that have you feel a sense of movement. I think when you feel stuck or frustrated, not, and you're wanting to create change, finding small things or making a commitment to yourself and following through. And I really like Dr. Nicole LaPera, who's written a book called How to Do the Work. She's a holistic psychologist. Her book's really good, and I found a lot of her concepts very useful. And one of the things that she recommends when you're looking to change is, and also to build trust in yourself. So changing, but trusting yourself that you can change. So building that is to just pick something really small. Like she uses the example of just get up and the first thing you do every day is drink a glass of water. So just do that like for a week or 2 weeks. And so you're demonstrating to yourself that you can make a change in your habits. And so that builds self-trust, and that helps to then build momentum toward change. So if it, in terms of speaking up, there might be something that there might be, if you've reflected on your boundaries, so do some of that work. What are my boundaries? What are my values? What do I want to communicate? If I want to change my career, you may not start with, like to your point about doing big things, you may not start with just going and quitting your job and then finding yourself trying to look for something. So small things, so in that case it might be, well, I'll spend 10 minutes on my resume every day for a week, and so making things really small helps to build that sense of momentum toward change. And that's a useful way to start, because trusting yourself is an important part too of finding your voice and taking action.
Definitely. And I think that's actually something I talk about a lot, just in the, I'm in the context of health, but this applies to all areas of life. Like we tend to, and with that self-talk, all the stuff we've been talking about here, self-expression, like we, in our heads, we talk to ourselves in a way that we would never generally, say to another person, another human being, right? And we tend to not keep our word to ourselves, let ourselves down all the time. And so there's literally, like, we do not have a lot of trust in ourselves. And I think, key to finding that authentic voice and also authentic expression is, like you said, learning to rebuild that trust with ourselves. And those can be really little things. Like it could even be, hey, I'm going to eat the cookie today. And you eat the cookie today. That's something that you said that's what you were going to do. And then you did it.
You did it.
Keeping integrity with yourself. So
yes, exactly. I think and things like also like your to-do list. Like if you have a to-do list and you get to the end of the day and every day there's things on there that you haven't done, make your to-do list shorter, so that you're doing what it is that you said you would do. So you're building that self-trust. So I know for myself, I've become much more aware of what I say I'm going to do, is thinking about, am I actually going to do that? If you're not going to do it, don't say it, because that just erodes your self-trust, and brings in a negative voice at the end of the day. Oh, like I didn't do that again. We tend to go to what we didn't do rather than what we did do. So if we can just go, okay, what are my top 3 things? If I do these 3 things today, that's it. What are those things? And that helps with that trust, which helps us to keep taking action and helps to keep our energy up.
Yeah, absolutely. and so key. And I was just thinking a lot because I've been thinking a lot about, and I don't know, this book comes up fairly regularly on my show. Have you ever read The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks? It's if you haven't,
No,
you should.
but
So
yes,
it's like one of those books that changes your life. I reread it, and
yes.
like every time I get something new out of it. But he talks about, being in our zone of genius and doing more there. So just in the idea of to-do lists and things. And I've started challenging my clients and, those listening to the show, like, because we can keep ourselves really busy, especially as women. It's like we
Mm,
make these to-do lists just to feel like we're doing something, but really challenge
mm,
yourself to think about like what are the one, two, maybe three things that actually going to move the needle or
mm,
connect you with who you are more. Like we can take that even a step further. I would start with just like make
mm,
it something that you can commit to actually getting done in the day and what you're,
mm.
holding your word to yourself.
Yes,
But yeah, that was just, I thought I'd add that layer. Um,
yes,
yeah.
yes. Busyness is a barrier. Thinking
Hmm.
we need to be productive or to be again have value. So taking things away is useful. Taking what do I really
Yeah.
need to do, or what, and going back to boundaries too. Like, could I outsource this? Who else could do this?
Hmm.
Do I need to do that?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's key. And be willing to do it because, and I've even come up against there were things that I love to do, but they really don't serve like I don't need to be the one doing them. Let's just put it that way.
Yes.
Like, in terms
Yes.
of business in a big way, but also in our households, like,
Yes.
it's just um yeah, and being willing to look at that and then that opens space for, doing the things that really serve you and the world, I would say.
Yes, yes, and I think, yeah, understanding that our value is not connected to how much we produce in a day has
Yes.
is useful. That yes, that our value is not connected to our productivity. That we're already enough. That's, I think, useful too. You don't have to do
Yeah.
anything or get anywhere or prove anything to be
Hmm.
enough. You're already enough just by existing, just by being here,
Just by
like
being.
being spreading your
Yeah.
energy in the world or sharing yourself with the world. That's enough. We don't have to because that sort of striving, that seeking for approval and proving ourselves is exhausting, can be exhausting.
It is.
Mm,
And, it's not serving anyone. And I
mm,
know for everyone listening to the show, myself included, it's like listen to hear this, ladies. Like we are enough. Just
mm,
being here is enough. And there's so many ways that I think we get lost in not expressing ourselves and losing our self-worth and our value. And like if we can just pause and say, I'm enough.
yes, more
Like,
being and less doing.
yeah. And like there's so much freedom. Like when I just said that, it's like, oh, like that's energizing and freeing in so many ways.
Yes,
Um,
you took a big breath when you said that.
yeah,
Took a breath out. Right enough.
I'm enough.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
How's
everyone
that?
should
That
try that.
feels good.
Just pause right now. In your car, even if you're around people, just pause, take a big breath, and say out loud, I'm enough. See how it
Mm,
feels. It feels good.
yes.
Um, yeah. All right. So really great stuff. In kind of bringing this all together, we've had, going on the self exploration of challenging our beliefs. Essentially, is what you were talking about, and our values, and asking if that's something that really is aligned with you and who you are and who you want to be,
Mm,
knowing that you're already enough, but
mm,
just
mm,
getting in touch with that side of yourself. So we have that exploration and then doing little things, start building trust in yourself and to challenge some of those, perceptions and meaning that you created.
mm.
And being really clear on, I liked one of the questions on your profile was about, how do we stand in a powerful yes or no and, really mean it. And I think we kind of answered that, but is there anything else you wanted to add to that piece of the conversation that we haven't touched on yet?
Um, no, I think the there's a strong link between power and voice. Like there's a quote that I really love by Arthur Joseph, who's a voice coach, and says, when you own your voice, you own your power. And I think it, you know, and it works the other way as well. When you own your power, you own your voice. And so understanding that link is useful, I think. That, yeah, when we know, because the two key things for speaking up and expressing yourself in terms of voices, I know what I want to say and I take the action to say it. So knowing what you want to say by having that self-connection and listening to your intuition and balancing that with, you know, the rational in terms of decision making and things. And then the courage in terms of the taking action and the speaking up, which is, you know, where you're the boundaries and your values, being clear on those things is really useful.
Yeah, absolutely. I look at, you know, being in balance with our self-expression and communication is like effortless communication. Like it's where it just flows and we're not worrying about it, or like we just authentically are living in communication and connection with others.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
standing in our value. So very powerful stuff, we'll say that. So for listeners, how can they connect with you? I know you're in the process of writing a book, so whenever that's done, I will add it to the show notes on this.
Yes, thanks.
How can they connect
taking
with
longer
you?
than, yes.
Find out more.
But my website would be the main place, because everything connects into there. So my social media connections and things. So which is sharonnatoli.com. And in terms of social media, yeah, probably Instagram, which is Sharon Natoli Speaks, would be the key one, probably, in terms of where I post things most regularly.
Got it. Well, I will put all that in the show notes. Any last thoughts and kind of wrapping this conversation up? I really enjoyed this, so I'm assuming.
No, thanks very much for having me. There's so much to talk about when it comes to like self-talk, and then, you know, speaking up and expression. And I think it's speaking up in your voice, it's a full body experience too. I guess I'd just maybe add that in, that yes, and we sort of touched on that a little bit too, that using your body and your mind helps you to perhaps move forward in a like kind of holistic way, using all the powers that you have, body, mind, spirit. Yeah.
all the things. I love it. Well, Sharon, thank you so much for getting up early and joining us to have this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Alex.